Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I just save everything wherever and then trust in Control F to find something when I'm looking for whatever I need. And because I find that that's how I operate, and I'm stress-free, anxiety-free when I'm just living my regular life, downloading stuff, saving files, whatever. But then I'll sometimes get paranoid and be like, no, there's got to be a better way to categorize, and I'll go way in the other direction. Like I'll just be stumbling over myself every time I do something. I'm thinking, where should this be placed? And then that lasts for about 48 hours. And then I'm like, you're just wasting time with admin bullshit as a form of resistance, and not want to do the real work. So yeah. And then I revert back to just being blasé and worry about it later mentality.
Yeah, I'm the same. I mean, I've tried to create, logical and sensible folders, but I never use them. So why bother?
Yeah, amen to that. How's you're I'm curious. You're offline. You're kind of temporarily deactivated your Instagram handle, and is that for the focus on Japanese learning?
So
primarily,
I do this like once or twice a year, and it's always to focus on something. I mean, it is completely psychological. I could just as easily log out. But for a good month or two, I like to just delete everything and either hone in on language learning or hone in on writing something. Or if I have any sort of project, just really hone in on it. And then it seems stupid to treat social media like a reward, but I don't know, sort of. Just once I'm done with whatever it is I'm doing, like, okay, now I'm allowed to waste time, or now I'm allowed to fuck around on YouTube again. Now I'm allowed to eat junk food again because I did X number of push-ups this week. And so, yeah, right now, in theory, I'm trying to learn Japanese, but I've been not necessarily putting it off. It's just, it's one of those things where you can't half-ass it. You really have to go all the way in for any of it to be effective. And it's just kind of daunting at the moment.
Yeah, I can imagine. And yeah, it makes sense. You want to eliminate the risk of temptation. So if you actually delete something, then you can, it's not like logging back in or anything like that. It's been hilarious over the years, just watching people's social media journeys and their people outwardly. I think we all struggle with social media addiction pretty much. If you're on it, you understand the compulsion to want to use it too much. And then I've just always found it very undignified when someone goes onto Facebook or Instagram and says, I'm deleting Instagram or Facebook.
Like it's a threat.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I look down upon it because I understand where it's coming from. There's been times where I've been like, oh, fuck, I wasted so much time today just mindlessly doom scrolling. And so, but I just think it's pitiful because inevitably that person comes crawling back a few months later. The addiction wins out. There's no AA for social media addiction yet, or perhaps there is. But so anyway, yeah, I've taken somewhat similar private stands in the past where I've been like, yeah, let's give that a rest for a while. But yeah, the public declaration is always a funny one.
It's the equivalent of when you're 5 and you tell your parents you're running away. They're like, all right, see you. And you're expecting this big reaction for your parents to apologize and say, we're so sorry we didn't give you whatever for your birthday or let you play video games tonight. You're like, no, I've made up my mind. I'm running away. You're never going to see me again. I mean, that's what these public declarations of deleting your social media are. And especially from men in their 30s, which I'm seeing more and more often. It's like, oh, come on, get a grip, guy.
Yeah, well, I guess that's headline news now. It's like if Pete Davidson reactivates his Instagram, that's like, fucking hell, drop everything. Let's figure out what Skeet's doing on the IG. So, yeah, I guess it's important to some people. But let's transition into the topic. The article, the Guardian one and the other one you sent me were fascinating. Well, when did this book come out, the one that you mentioned that kind of gave you the concept to want to chat about this?
Well, what's interesting about this story is I looked on the net and all the articles were quite short. And I was looking for more of the meat that was found in the book because, nowadays you could find just about everything you want, whether it's on Wikipedia or an article. But these articles didn't quite do justice to just how weird this story was. And so the story, as I discovered it, is from a book called Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, which I think is a fucking great title. Especially if you're talking about Russia. Like, you cannot find a more apt title, and like this guy just nailed it. So the writer, Peter Pomorantsev, he's Ukrainian, born in the USSR, grew up in London, I believe, or somewhere in the UK. And right after the fall of the Soviet Union and in the early 2000s, he decided to come to Russia as like a TV producer, and he got involved in a lot of projects. And this story about Ruslana, the model, is only a short part of the book. This entire book is nuts. It really paints just what a weird, fucked up, awful country Russia is, and like the most like honest and like not gonna hold your hand or sugarcoat things way possible. There's stories about prostitutes, corruption, cops, and like mafia people hiring this guy to like film a movie about them where they play themselves, and real guns, real stabbings, real blood, and it gets wild. But this story really stuck out to me because I'm super interested in pretty much anything involving cults. I just find it endlessly fascinating how susceptible people are to fall for this stuff, and just how there's so many red flags and warning signs, but it keeps happening. So long story short, the story we're talking about is about a model named Ruslana who died at the age of 20, and more specifically, she killed herself. She jumped off of her apartment building in New York and died. And the initial reaction was, wow, why would such a young, beautiful model do this? And granted, someone's beauty really has nothing to do with their suicide. And I just think it's odd how that's so often people's initial reactions. Oh, they were so beautiful, or they were so handsome, things like that. I mean, models, not all, but often, are pretty fucked up and have a lot of issues. And so it turned out, though, that she was involved with, they don't call themselves a cult. They call it life guidance or something like that. And Peter
was it the Rosa Center or something? Yeah.
Yeah, also referred to as the Rose of the World. And when Peter Pomorantsev first heard of this, there was some switches going on in his brain thinking, there's got to be more to this than it just some like life canceling. There's something more than just like she's getting life coaching, and he wanted to look into it. And his producer's like, who gives a fuck? No one wants to see this story. We're making TV for like middle-aged Russian moms. Like, no one wants this story. But he did it anyways. He sent an investigatorial journalist, or an undercover journalist, to infiltrate this really, really secretive group, cult. I'm just going to call it cult for the sake of ease and time. And it actually ended up fucking this guy up. Like, the sessions he went to, and he didn't even continue, because as cults are, there's often layers, and with each new course you have to pay more, and the more they suck you in, the more money you pay. And after the first course, he bowed out of it, but for weeks he was really struggling. He couldn't sleep, he had to go on antidepressants, he lost a lot of weight. And this is a guy who's gone undercover with different gangs and really dangerous people, and it fucked him up.
Yeah, I found the kind of overview of the book in the Guardian article interesting because it kind of painted the picture of Russia since the year 2000 kind of as like a modern Wild West of the appearance of anything goes, but the understanding that Putin is the one kind of dictating the weird reality that people are existing in. And there was a quote within the article, I don't recall, paraphrasing, it was something like, in the morning, Russia can feel like a monarchy. In the afternoon, it can feel like a sham democracy. And by the evening, it can feel like a totalitarian state. And just kind of, from 30,000 feet before we dig into the story, like in terms of the bizarre characters and the kind of strange occurrences such as this cult that can exist, do you feel like Putin intimately understands the Russian psyche and has purposefully allowed this kind of craziness to flourish, in that he wants total power, but he also understands if he rules with an iron fist akin to North Korea, that there would be just a straight up revolution and then he'd be killed in the streets. So therefore he's designed this system where, an example they give in the article is where a lady was selling some type of jewelry or some type of product and she was doing really well. But then eventually they just created a new law and threw her in a really harsh prison for a few months. And then when she got out, she was kind of the tool of two warring factions, where they were trying to use her as an asset in their political. So it's like it seems from the outside looking in that Putin has created this a society built on controlled chaos where there's the illusion of freedom, but then severe ramifications that are visible. There's public executions and public downfalls of seemingly really powerful people. So is this a happy accident of his reign, or do you feel like this is something that he's purposefully implemented over the last 20, 30 years?
I think it's definitely something he's implemented. And the story you mentioned of the woman who was thrown in prison because of a bizarre new law was almost what I wanted to talk about, but I couldn't find the exact information. And if I didn't have like the facts right, I didn't want to, not do justice to the story. But that's also from the book, and that's so fucked up. She was just going about her life and got arrested without knowing the reason why. And it's based on charges from a law they invented after the fact. So they accused her of something and created a law to justify what they were arresting her for. And
they did a minority report arrest.
They minority reported her. Yeah, they did. And I think Putin's doing all of this deliberately. I mean, you look at any, and I'm doing this in air quotes, opposition party that exists in Russia. Like, Putin loves them. He creates them for the guise of opposition, and he makes them as clownish and, idiotic as possible, just so you could see, like, look, this is the opposition. Like, I'm obviously the only choice here. And it's a farce. It's an absolute farce. And I think, as opposed to, the North Korea method, which you mentioned, this kind of makes it so him and then, whoever his predecessors are will perpetually be in power, and it will always be someone like him based on the system they've created, which is the Wild West, and anything goes to an extent until they decide anything goes except this one little corner over here. I don't like that, so I'm going to throw this person in prison, whether they're guilty or not, just to set an example and send a message.
Well, yeah, I tried to kind of understand the mentality of a Russian person and put myself in their shoes. And I think the one kind of main difference that I would assume between myself and a Russian is that it seems like they're kind of swept up in almost like a mass scale role playing game, where over here I feel like a complete individual. Like there are larger forces at bay which impact my life, but I'm not part of like a big production. I'm just doing my own thing, and occasionally the bureaucracy slaps me in the face and I have to deal with it. But it's just kind of, you exist within yourself and within your family and maybe your friendship group, and that's it. But over there, it must be this weird kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We all know what's going on. And I don't know, I did a couple theater productions when I was at university. It's exciting to be a part of the production, whether you're the lead actor or a supporting role, or you're just a part of the stage crew. There is something kind of nice about all being involved in something, even when something goes horribly wrong, because you kind of know that the show must go on. And so because Russians don't seem like overly theatrical people, and I guess it's kind of like a show with the most dire consequences imaginable, but does that kind of explain their willingness, or maybe the patriotism or pride that could maybe spring from existing within such a society, as opposed to shame and fear? It's because it gives every new day, you're kind of like, oh, what crazy shit is going to unfold today, and I want to be a part of it.
I think Russia, because we're talking about cults, is like a cult on a large scale. Like it itself is a cult. You know, when you tout bullshit for such a long time, you know it's not true, but it's just so nice to believe it. And you're like, hey, well, you know what? We're given a pass to believe this. We're told it's okay to believe this. I like believing it. It's like, I like being a dickhead, or I like being racist. I like being Russian. I like having these thoughts validated. And I don't remember if it was a speech or an interview, but Putin talked about the problem of American exceptionalism and how Americans think they're so unique among the world. But you could flip that back right at Russians. I mean, they have this whole concept of Russian soul that, no one could ever understand us. We're just so deep and so unique and so uniquely spiritual in our faith and our loyalty that this is the Russian soul. And, they've been writing about it for several centuries and making poems and novels about it. And, you talk to a Russian, they'll believe it. I don't know if this radio program has since been banned, but it's a supposedly liberal Russian radio show called I'm mixing up words here. Echo of Moscow. I think that's how they translate it. Echo of Moscow. And there's this woman talking about how she lived in the UK for a time, and she's saying, in other countries they can't do the arts the way we can. They have ballet there, and it's a nice, little performance, but it doesn't have the soul in it, not the way Russian ballet has. And I feel like Russians are the only true artists who could do ballet or do theater or do opera. And people there have this mentality. They really think that, they really buy into their own uniqueness.
Yeah, they sound like more intense French people. Kind of like our culture is the best, and perhaps not as charming as the French person to kind of illustrate. Or maybe like the goth kid in the class who's kind of just got dark clothes on and is brooding, looking out the window where everyone else is talking about who's going to get together at the school dance. And the goth kid is like, ugh, lame. I'm not going to that. Yeah.
So I find it not surprising that cults have a pretty easy time, like, taking form in Russia. And especially this life coaching nonsense. When I lived in Russia, and always female, but my friends would be like, hey, David, I have this acquaintance, or I have this friend. He's a really cool guy. Can I give him your contact? And I would just think, why? Just let me give you his contact, or give him your contact, and he just wants to talk to you. Don't worry, he's not going to sell you anything. He just wants to talk to you. They're like, all right. And so it's some guy I've never met, and he would call me on the phone. And, they're always overly friendly, overly confident. And what they do is they either talk in doublespeak or they talk in circles. They talk about nothing, but they insert enough like positive phrases and positive reinforcement in between the nothing. And they always ask you questions that only have yes answers. Like, oh, see, yeah, like, you're on board. See, you get it. I know you're a smart guy. And I noticed this is like becoming very popular, especially among women there, to get really interested in life coaching, or to get involved, or have friends who are life coach. And they're always trying to spring them on their friends.
Wow. Kind of like, it's almost like a pyramid scheme or something. It's kind of trickling down to to the individuals. But to kind of focus on the beautiful, gorgeous Ruslana, yeah, she's absolutely only 20 when she does, no, 21 or something, 22.
I think 20. I think 20.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think
So just super young and extremely attractive. And in the article, they refer to the fact that half the runway models, supermodels in the world are Russian. And I've actually noticed in the last few years, just through a bit of private research, that a lot more up and coming porn stars now are Russian and from Eastern Europe. And that kind of intrigued me a little bit because a lot of the female porn stars, there's a lot more kind of girl on girl stuff expected. Guy, up and coming dude porn stars. Maybe they are, and I'm just not clicking on it. But there's not kind of like any type of homosexual component to their kind of rise to porn stardom. But with the girls, it's a lot different. They're expected to swing both ways. So just a slight detour here, but I'm kind of aware, and I've seen some YouTube videos online of the homophobia stuff of like guys who maybe appear effeminate or potentially gay are getting yelled at, beaten up in public by super, macho Russian guys. How would the female porn star gay stuff be seen? If you were a young, cute Russian girl, you're a cam girl, you were having sex with other women, would you be vilified as strongly for your homosexual acts as a man, or is it kind of more like, oh, girls that just can play around with each other, that's tolerated?
The latter. Yeah, it's fucking hot. Like, let it be.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to ask them, not in that setting, like, say you're in a formal setting, and you didn't say, like, hey, do you want to watch two hot girls go at it? You'd be like, how do you feel about lesbians? They'd be like, oh, horrible. It's ungodly. But if you were to be like, hey, see that beautiful woman over there? Yeah. Okay, see that one over there? Yeah. How would you feel if, like, they just started making out? Like, oh, hell yeah, I'd love that. So, I mean, it's completely hypocritical. There's no logic in it.
Well, yeah, but I guess there's this happens across cultures, but there's the implied assumption that certain lipstick lesbians hooking up with each other are doing it for male attention as opposed to for a real attraction or at least an ongoing, lasting relationship with one another, typified by the spectacular Russian duo Tattoo from 20 years ago, if you recall those gals who would make out with one another in front of Carson Daly in Times Square.
Best day of his life. And by the way, I don't remember which one, and I don't remember their names, but one of the girls from Tattoo is like a huge vocal Putin supporter right now, who's like coming out the videos and showing up and singing his praises. But actually, I forget the name of the documentary, but I've seen a couple where Russian women who are gay and, are openly gay and they work for charities that help gay people or try to spread gay rights. They're not immune to the violence that you usually see happen against gay men in Russia. They've been attacked and they've been harassed as well.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense because they represent something more evil as opposed to the lipstick lesbians who are kind of just
worse.
Yeah, and why are, this is perhaps a dumb question, but why are so many Russians supermodels? They're obviously gorgeous and unique looking, but is there some type of is that like a path out of poverty or out of Russia that so many people are aware of, and so therefore it's kind of created a pipeline for Russian models, or is this just a coincidence?
I think it's one of those cases where Russia is very, very, very aware of the image of its women. The women are aware, the men are aware, sex tourists are aware, Turkish guys are aware, and so like men flock there to find a bride for sex tourism or, for casting, to cast models. And so it's this thing that everyone's aware of and everyone seems willing to play a role in. And so the women, they're not particularly modest. Like, yeah, I'm hot. I know that my body is what I'm valued for, and I'm gonna make money off of it. Or I'll be an Instagram model, and I want the attention. I want the sugar daddy. I want the rich man. I want like these nice things. I mean, good lord, like I knew enough Russian people who I knew them before maybe they had this revelation where they were still ordinary, they were college students, but then like, oh, wait a minute. Why study hard and do all this bullshit when I could just like take really stupid looking but sexy pictures and then someone will fly me to go to Dubai for a week?
Yeah. Yeah, it's bizarre how popular that kind of Eastern European mentality of almost kind of like traditional values of like this is my main commodity as a human, therefore I'm gonna, because in the where in places such as America, Australia, UK, female empowerment and the focus on kind of female careerism. I'm not sure if you saw might have been a month or two ago, there was a lady who works in her early 20s, works at the main LinkedIn office in Chicago, and she created a TikTok video of like a day in the life at the office for me. And it was like, okay, I get there at like 9 a.m. and oh my God, there's cute little bagels out the front. And then I've got to go help with a photo shoot. And then, oh my God, there's someone coming in today to help to show us how to make pancakes for lunch. And it's just all this kind of like modern office bullshit where no one's actually doing any real work. They're just walking around enjoying the kind of and there's like, oh, there's a chill out space where you don't want to sleep, but you just need some quiet, peace and quiet. And it just, so the reaction online was for her to be kind of, just kind of pillarized, is that a word? And made fun of. And the reaction, at least on so many people on Twitter, which could be bots, but it was like, oh, this is where Eastern European women have got it right. The whole trad wife movement, where it's like, yeah, you should, what you'd be so much happier at home, with kids, and you're a good looking girl, why don't you get yourself a husband? And it's hilarious because I think that at least those kind of certain outlier moments in our culture where it was objectively ridiculous, this and it kind of had nothing to do with their sex. It was more a case of how employers in the modern world trying to merge lifestyle and work with one another and trying to make people like, yeah, being at work's like a party. But I've noticed like a real shift and a real kind of like almost fetishization of Russian, Eastern European female kind of traditional values on the rise, where people like, I have to try and date women who work in offices like that. I'm sick of that bullshit. I just want a Russian wife who knows her value and is all tied up with her looks.
And goddamn, I can't think of anything that sounds more miserable. It's one of those things where if you're just, and I hate to pick on Ahmed, but it's always a Turkish guy just browsing through these Russian Instagram models and commenting on every single photo they have and sending them messages. That might seem like happiness, but it's definitely not. And holy shit, give me like 2 seconds. The biggest goddamn insect is in my house right now. Give me 2 seconds. I am going to kill this son of a bitch.
Crush it like a Putin detractor.
All right, give me a second.
Take your time.
Look, coming from Australia, I imagine creepy crawlies don't bother you as much as others, but holy shit, this place is alive with these sons of bitches.
Main insects like crickets and shit?
No, like giant centipedes, spiders, moths the size of a fist, other creepy crawlies I've never seen before.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that type of stuff. It's the rodents that freak me out. In Australia, our last place, we had a mouse issue, and had to set some traps. And then the kind of it wasn't so much setting the trap was the issue. It was more like when I heard it snap, and I knew there was one dead there, and I had to replace the trap. I was, just the way that your mind can catastrophize and be like, as I'm reaching for the trap, one's going to run on top of my hand, run up my arm, go down my shirt. And, like you see it all unfolding, and the mouse is going to be just freaking out itself. And, so that's the stuff. But it was actually a good experience to kind of trap and kill 6 or 7 mice, because I was like, these are, by the last one, I was like, yeah, I'm getting the hang of this. So, yeah.
I don't want to pick on Turkish guys too much more, but I almost feel like this could be like a throwback to a 2000s type boner comedy. God, I miss those movies. So I've worked with a lot of Russian women, Ukrainian women, and every single one of them has like page after page after page of messages from Turkish guys on social media, guys I've never met. And it's not just like, oh, hey, you're cute. Paragraphs long, like novel length long, of them explaining who they are, why they think they're the most beautiful girl ever, what their plan is, and how he's going to invite them back to Turkey and introduce them to their family, and how they're going to get married and have a great life. And they're just so shameless, but also the most confident men I've ever seen in my life. And there's a lot of Turkish dudes who go, been a while since I've been to Russia, but Ukraine, when I was there last summer, they were everywhere, hitting up all the strip joints, hitting up all the places with really shady names like harems and places like that. And I don't know. I mean, one time out of 100 or a million, it's got to work out in their favor. They keep coming back.
They sound like the more eloquent version of the Indian guys who keep it simple. The classic "show me your bobs and vagine," but the Turks are kind of James Joyce in comparison.
Have you seen the remix version of that? They took like the memes and turned it into an auto-tune song.
Oh no,
it's pretty good.
Awesome.
It's pretty good.
So with the movie, would you be focusing on Ruslana? Would she be your protagonist, or would you kind of tell the story from the perspective of someone in like running the cult?
I think in this case, I don't know if this is breaking the rules of the podcast, but a miniseries.
Yeah, no, this is great. We stick to the movie format, but let's expand out.
So just recently, I don't know if you saw this new show on HBO called Tokyo Vice.
No, I heard about it though. I actually saw some porn parodies of it, and I'm like, oh, I'd like to see the actual show. But yeah, no, I've heard of it, never seen it.
So it's a good show, and it's one of those things where I like and dislike it at the same time, which is fine. It's okay to be conflicted about things. It's based on a book that I read, and the book's pretty boring. It's about an American journalist who was like working with the Tokyo police beat and hanging out with Yakuza and stuff. And the things are interesting in theory, but he was just like a really boring asshole. And what I like about the show is they hired like the most handsome, charismatic actor to play him, when the real guy was like a schlubby, like not that good looking Jewish dude. Not to say Jewish dudes can't be good looking. The actor's Jewish, but he's like a very good looking actor, not a schlubby guy. And it's one of those frustrating things where all the Yakuza characters and police characters are so much more interesting than the boring white American guy. But the show is cool, and it does have like this really nice gritty feel to it. And Michael Mann directed the first episode, and it really, gave you vibes of Heat and Collateral and other really cool gritty crime dramas that he's done. So I was thinking something similar, and not having the author of the book be the main character. I hate when that happens. It always just feels so cheesy, and they make the author more involved than he has any right to be. Mm-hmm. But perhaps the guy who went undercover to infiltrate the cult, the undercover journalists, and like see his degradation from like knowing it's bullshit, but spending enough time there where it actually starts to get into his head.
Yeah, definitely. That's probably the most interesting perspective. Someone getting who knows it's bullshit but still gets coerced anyway. And I find that for some reason when I read your article, I was reminded of old kind of depictions in terms of the art world of how they used to draw Satan, and they used to like depict Satan as a really attractive, compelling character in the visual art world a few hundred years ago. And then in the 20th century, 21st century, when you think of Satan, you think of the Tenacious D video with Dave Grohl, like in a red jumpsuit with horns on his head, and how you think it just makes some logically, if there was a devil, he would be handsome and interesting, and you'd want to spend time with him and actually kind of get involved with that, as opposed to someone who looked like a devil. And so I kind of think the same with cults. In a lot of TV shows and movies, the way they are portrayed, it's kind of like got cults, just blaring from the rooftop, and kind of like, we're trying to take your money, we're trying to take your freedom from the outset. And so just the believability of those kind of storylines is so difficult to follow. So yeah, I could imagine someone kind of that character being aware that there's something sinister going on, trying to expose the most sinister elements for an article or a story, but then also just being hypnotized and kind of actually, the good parts overriding his better judgment.
And so, first of all, the whole Satan thing, you have to understand that in the 20th century, they really had to dumb things down for Americans. So, like, Satan can't be this good-looking, attractive manipulator. He's ugly. He's got horns, and he's red. And about cults, so, like, this one in particular, what they would do is a lot of victim blaming. So they'd be like, tell us about the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Oh, my dad died. Well, that's your fucking fault. Or what happened to you? I was raped as a kid. Well, that's your fucking fault. Like, you're weak. You're a victim. And then they'd make people like get off, like go in pairs and just reveal their darkest secrets to one another, and then do weird shit like just stare at each other's eyes for 10 minutes in silence. No one's allowed to go to the bathroom. No one's allowed to leave for lunch. And the guy would just talk about nonsense for hours and hours and like write charts and diagrams on the board that had nothing to do with anything. And at a certain point, it's almost like hypnosis where your brain just can't follow, so you give up. Like, have you ever had that feeling where someone is just going on and on and on about something so unrelatable, you almost feel like you're going to pass out. You start to get lightheaded.
Yeah, I'm usually a vote with my feet type of person, and I've managed, but yeah, I do recall certain situations where, yeah, you don't have the energy to fight back after a certain point, and you're not necessarily agreeing, but you're complying because you're just like, I don't want to go down you seem like you have far more energy than I do on this topic, and you'll destroy me if I try and fight back. And so, yeah, I can definitely see that compliance leading to a blind faith if you kind of handicap someone's defenses to a large extent.
So it begs the question, why are models in particular so susceptible to this kind of thing? Because at this one, a lot of the clients were models. And it's one of those things where if you look at their pages on Instagram, in theory, they're traveling, they're beautiful, they're eating the best food, they're in exotic locations, they hang out with other beautiful people. So why do they need this?
It's a good question. I think there's potentially just like a lack of actual connection to other people, like the weird, the average everyday person, you kind of understand the physics of the world, and like, to get something you need to work hard for it, and then what you imagine life to be like, it's going to be, if at best, 20% of that. Whereas someone who kind of gets given stuff to them, you get given stuff, and you might get material throwaway friendships and relationships, but there must be kind of like a subconscious understanding of that you haven't earned this. This feels false. And so if you're a real dummy, you don't care. You're like, well, whatever, I'm getting everything I need. And maybe you'll have horrendous issues later in life, but a young person who's maybe vulnerable emotionally and craving some actual kind of like a real connection, that would potentially be the kind of the attraction of a cult or some type of like social circle that would give you something more real. That is my 1 semester of psychology, completely untrained assumptions here. What would you be thinking?
Well, I don't know, because again, I want to believe my bullshit detector is pretty like I could tell when someone's conning me, and maybe I do let them speak longer than I should, but I also don't have an issue saying like, hey, it's not for me. Like, no, just listen. It's like, hey, like, you go do your thing. It's not for me. I'm ending the conversation there. The way my mind works, it almost seems like people at a certain point, they do know it's a trap, but they like the idea that it's not, and they don't want to admit that it is. And they think, well, maybe if I do go all the way, I will find that silver lining. And like, maybe if I just commit fully to the bullshit, I'll end up happy. And
that's the whole science. Yeah, isn't that the whole why Scientology is effective even for intelligent people? Because it's wacky and outlandish, but there is like this progression program where if you're dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, you get the more intense modules and more information slowly gets passed on to you about how the the thetans and stuff are, pulling the strings in terms of what we see here on Earth. And so, yeah, there is potentially someone who is like willing to go wade through murky bullshit for the kind of like the eventual payoff of like, oh, I'll finally get the real answer at the end. And yeah, I would, in preparation for this, I was kind of also thinking about the Paul Thomas Anderson movie, The Master, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and I fluctuate on that movie because sometimes I think they did a good job of making it compelling. The concept of a cult, or at least a snake oil salesman at the center of a cult. And then other times I think like maybe they didn't do enough work in terms of like what was actually appealing about this guy who is, I guess, based on L. Ron Hubbard with Scientology. But in terms of at least the inner mechanics of how it works, it does seem like, at least in that movie, the way it works to get people hooked is that you break them down. You got to break them down to build them back up the way you want them to. And then once you do that, you have them. So it sounds like this mob over in Russia were doing something similar.
And I'm just thinking, I get that, but me, it's like, I don't want to be broken down. Fuck that and fuck you. But again, look, despite my model good looks, I've never actually been casted as a model, so I can't speak for models. But it seems like models, they kind of are like hungry for that, to be broken down. Maybe just the fact that their entire life is being an image. Like, people see them as a photo and not as a human being. And maybe being broken down is the way they feel human. They feel they're learning about who they actually are, even if they hate it.
And what about the kind of the flow of this? Would you be, this guy is infiltrated the cult, the model girls there? Are you just existing within the kind of cult and within the show, or are you trying to kind of explore the themes that we discussed earlier in terms of what was happening within like the broader cult of Russia itself?
See, I like when you play devil's advocate, because it's so easy to say, hey, cults are bad, I'm going to film why it's bad. I like movies that, that take something like Hitler Youth and make it look fun. Like, we know it's not, but it attracted some people, and the movie's going to, like, play that perspective. So I think the show would start with her suicide, and so that's like the inciting incident. Why did she kill herself? Go back in time a bit and show the positive aspects of the cult, like show people happy and thriving and like making it look like the best thing ever, the best hangout with the best people with a charismatic leader, and make it look like something that would attract you, that to make you really want to be a part of this and show the benefits of it. So you're thinking, wait a minute, maybe they're onto something. Maybe me as an audience wants to join this cult. That looks kind of fun. And that would be maybe the first 2 or 3 episodes. So I would introduce the lead later on and be like, hey, well, you know what? It's not all rainbows and sunshine. There's something sinister going on here, and I want you to find out. And so it'd be kind of a slow burn. Like, have him get in there and slowly but surely uncover the layers. But as we talked about earlier, he kind of falls susceptible to it as well. And then the latter part could be about him relapsing and trying to, like, get his life back together after leaving the cult behind.
Do you feel like the cult leaders themselves have the guilt that would come with I'm fucking all these people over. I'm whether it's I'm destroying them financially or I'm destroying them psychologically, or do you only become a cult leader or like a political dictator because you can compartmentalize so effectively? You can be like, well, here is how I'm manipulating this person, but when I'm playing with my kids at home, I could be a happy person and sleep well at night because I either don't feel like I'm doing something wrong or I just don't I don't care. Is that how do people sleep at night who do this type of shit?
I think it's as simple as they don't care. I think people are increasingly becoming more selfish, and everything's about me. It's about my personal brand. Who gives a fuck what that other guy thinks, or if my actions affect them? Like, did I get what I wanted from my, what do they call it, vision board or something? And even on a small scale, like people who can be friendly, I notice so often people are just so self-absorbed that if anyone asks for a helping hand with something that's doable, but it's a slight inconvenience for that person, they're just not going to do it. And so it's like, oh, right there, that's on a smaller scale, your lack of empathy, your lack of giving a shit, your lack of considering the feelings or POV of the other person. So these cult leaders, I think in order to achieve like that level of manipulation and just being a shithead, you can't care. Like for me, I'm always hyper aware of how my actions affect other people. I'll notice if me and my friends are in a public place and we're being too loud. I'll be aware, and then I'll get really embarrassed. Or if I'm standing in the way and like somewhere with heavy foot traffic, I'll be like, oh well, that was rude of me. I'll get out of the way. And there's some people who just, they don't have that. There's the guy who will answer his phone in the cinema and talk at full volume. Like, that's just something from being a baby that you don't do. Like, it's common knowledge. No one needs to teach you that. But there's people who do it.
Yeah, I have also kind of like, I guess I'd call it acute empathy, where, like, for example, if we were in a line to get into a club or something and you told me that you need a piss, then it's almost contagious. It would be like, I need to piss. Like, I need to get you to a bathroom ASAP because like it's bothering, like I can't enjoy myself until, and that's what I wonder about. I think it's kind of it's almost selfish having that level of empathy, because you're like, your problem might prevent me from doing what I want to do next. So you kind of like, I'll problem solve. I'll let you piss ASAP so that I can go back to just like not thinking about you. That's
just being like, oh, fuck off, cunt.
Yeah, exactly. Like that. That's where I try and kind of like, because when I say acute empathy, as in like, oh, I'm such a great person thinking of other people, and like, it's not that at all. I think it's almost like selfishness because, and I watched this great movie. I finished it a couple nights ago. Oslo, August 31st, it's called. It's the second in the Oslo trilogy by Joachim Trier, this Norwegian director. And he, in it, it's about a drug addict who's kind of a day in his life where he's just out of rehab and he's speaking with running into his family members and his friends who he hasn't seen in a while, and he's just running into the issue that happens with when you get into your 30s, and he's talking about friendships dissolving, and it's kind of in the movie it's talking about like how people pursue family or a career as they get older, and therefore your world kind of gets smaller because you're just focusing on your own shit. And that's something I think about a lot because, you know, when you're in your 20s, you spend more time with your friends, you generally have more friends. And as I'm getting older, I noticed the same thing happening with me where I'm like, okay, I like what I'm doing with my career. I like what I'm doing with my family. That's all great. But there is like a nagging worry that I'm like letting people down. Like I'm like, oh fuck yeah, by being selfish in those ways and just dedicating time to myself, I'm like that every action has an equal yet opposite reaction. I'm neglecting the things that I used to care about because of it. And ironically, well, I'm not sure if it's ironic, but I know other people are doing the same thing. Friendship's a two-way street. That's why it's not, you know, the friendships dissolve because both people are probably focusing on their own shit. But it definitely doesn't, you know, and to bring this back to cult leaders, like playing the devil's advocate is you say they don't care about other people's feelings, and it's like, do we? We are we like to think we can. It's like, oh, it's such a shame I don't speak to that person anymore, and you give yourself a pat on the back for even having the thought of like I should do that. I'm like, what a good person I am for even thinking of that.
I'm good, yeah.
but maybe they're just following that to completion and being like, well, yeah, you don't unless you actually take action upon something, you don't care about it. So anyway, I'm not sure where that came from, but yeah, just trying to kind of get in the heads of these characters and in this kind of broader cult world of Russia, how would they operate such a kind of scheme?
I guess it's that like age-old question: who's worse, the terrorist leader who actually believes in their religious fundamentalism and does what he does, or the terrorist leader who doesn't believe in the religious aspect, but he knows it's an easy way to manipulate those to do his bidding? But the thing is, it's like the result's the same whether he believes or doesn't believe. And I guess it comes down to each individual's own morality. Me personally, when we're thinking of like a villain in a movie, I always prefer some like level of ambiguity. I think, was it the last episode we talked about how neither of us like Joker or Batman?
Yeah, maybe last one or the one before.
I
Yeah.
think so. But I really, really like Heath Ledger's Joker, and it's almost a cliche at this point, but it was really perfect the way you know nothing about why he's evil. He just is, and that's good enough. Like, his actions are what matter. Delving into his backstory isn't going to really enhance that in any way. We don't need to know why he's a huge dick. He just is. And that's my preferred way to like get engaged with the story, especially the quote unquote bad guy. So I think keeping the cult leaders at a distance makes them more almost alien, makes them harder to gauge, but you could kind of see that level of charisma. Like I remember as a kid, you know, pre-social media, rock stars like kind of seemed godly because they're just this fiery presence on stage. They're larger than life. They look cool as hell. But the moment you actually like hear how they speak, or you see what their thoughts are, you're like, oh, this guy's kind of a dipshit, or like, oh, that's his voice, that's how he sounds. Just play music. I don't want to know how you sound or why you do what you do. I kind of like having these figures kept at a distance and having them retain mystique, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, the the documentary, Netflix documentary, Wild Wild Country,
Yeah.
about the Rajneeshis, that springs to mind in terms of that Osho guy. Yeah, you'd be like, oh, real super deep poetry, and when he'd come out, I guess it wasn't a rock star. It was kind of a rock star reception, but in a different way, with everyone sitting on the floor in their orange stupid shit, and then, but yeah, when you know more, it's like, yeah, that guy's out of his mind on pills and just fucking comatose almost. But I don't know. There's something. It made him kind of look elegantly wasted and cool as fuck. So yeah, yeah, I could kind of, if I was one of those dumb hippies on that commune, I could just look at that guy, and he looked exotic. He looked ethereal. He looked like I want a religious figure to look like. Like he fit the part. Everything kind of came together nicely. And if you'd already been broken down in some capacity, then just a guy looking the part, that would do the trick, I think.
If you could remember it before I look it up, one of his quotes makes me laugh every time. But if you remember it off the top of your head, please say it, because I don't want to butcher it.
No, yeah, but I think that was the thing, is that all his quotes were pretty cool as well. Like they all, out of context, they all kind of seemed to make sense in terms of what I saw, but it was just kind of like Alan Watts type of shit from memory.
So it's loading. So what he said: democracy basically means government by the people, of the people, for the people. But the people are retarded.
Yes. Got a couple new converts here. We're down. Let's bring him back.
And I mean, the way he says it in his slow cadence and, his accent makes it all the more hilarious. Doesn't even do it justice. Just beautiful. It's a beautiful quote.
Yeah. I often think that if you want to ruin the mystique about yourself, is you should start a podcast, because you're letting everything fly, and I often think about the hundreds of hours I've been on the mic talking shit. I must have contradicted myself. I can feel it happening sometimes where I'm saying something and then I have like a memory where I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure I said the exact opposite 15 episodes ago. But that's a human being, right? Is that there's this Irish band I used to like called The Thrills. I guess I still like them, but I haven't thought of them in a long time. But they had this one lyric I really liked where he was like, I'm too vague for greatness. And I think that if you're someone who just kind of lets it fly and you act like a person, you don't come across as great, because it's just everyday and commonplace to shoot from the hip and sometimes say this and then sometimes say the exact opposite. It's hard to, but whereas a cult leader like that, it's like they pull punches, and I think they think methodically about what they're going to say and the impact it's going to have. Whereas once again, I think I'm too selfish. I just have a thought and I'm like, you should definitely say this, and then it falls out of you. Whereas I think, yeah, someone of that ilk, the show never ends. You've constantly got a bit. We're all playing a role, but I guess I'm phoning my role in at this point. And there's a great relief that comes with that, where you're like, yeah, I'm just a bit part actor. Pick up a bit of extra work here or there, but they're like, no, I'm the man. I get everything I do will impact the other characters around me. So yeah, I like the concept of kind of otherworldly cult figures within the show. But as we kind of wrap this up, do you have any? Are there any kind of like big names or people in the biz that you'd want to be attached to this show that you think would put their own special sauce in it?
Not really. I feel like big names behind the scenes, sure. I mean, I mentioned Michael Mann doing the first episode of Tokyo Vice. I think he'd do a great job with something like this. Just something that dirty, no real flash to it, nothing overly expensive looking, but like great city shots, great nighttime shots, like really grimy. But as you know, any Russian model could probably play this. It's not an insult to Ruslana, but if you were to like tell someone to close their eyes and imagine like the prototypical Russian model, like that was Ruslana, and that's not an insult to
Yeah.
her. She's incredibly beautiful, but like to almost to a comical degree of like that's what a Russian model looks like.
One thing that jumped out at me about her is I saw that she was like Kazakhstani, like by birth, but from Russian lineage. So if she was someone like that who looked like a, what you imagine like a white Russian person to look like, but she was from Kazakhstan, would other Russians like, I don't know, the people from kind of like the big cities look down upon her as kind of like provincial, or kind of like, even though you're of the same kind of ethnic stock as us, why were you born in this kind of like outpost? Would is there any, it's not racism, I guess it's kind of like cultural elitism. Does that exist within the kind of like the surrounding regions, even if you're kind of ethnically Russian?
This is there's no evidence from this other than like anecdotal. But it seems that a lot of these like models who do become successful or who have the look that they're looking for tend to come from more provincial places, whether it be somewhere in Kazakhstan or Siberia. I feel like a lot of them come from Siberia. Like it almost seems rare that like, oh, well, of course she was born in Moscow. And Moscow's where they end up, and then eventually Paris or Milan. But I think they come from these villages because there is nothing there. So if like suddenly there's this super gorgeous woman, it's like you got to get the hell out of here and like make something of your life. Um, if she were actually ethnically Kazakh, I don't know if that would have changed things. That's a good question because a lot of people in Kazakhstan are like Ruslana of Russian descent. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there are any like famous Kazakh models. I'm sure there must be. I just can't recall any.
Yeah, it's. I guess the reason I ask is because, as an Australian, we Australians, Kiwis, South Africans, we are cultural outposts of the British Empire, and so but growing up, there are. I lived in London for a little bit in my early 20s, and there are, as you're well aware, plenty of dickhead Australians walking around causing chaos, and so that's a stereotype. But it's more a case of the fact of the way they're behaving, as opposed to like there's no kind of like historical or colonial baggage attached to that. It's not like, oh yeah, we should send you back to the prison colony where you belong. It's just
Right.
like, no, you're and so personally, I never felt any type of like there was rivalry over sport, but there was no kind of like real elitism from British people. I guess there would be from like blue blood, royal, super, uh, the kind of like upper class British people, but they look down upon everyone,
Yeah.
of like British people included. So it's but yeah, it was always, I guess the Ukrainian crisis, war started making me think about this because I just assumed that like Russia, and I guess a lot of Russians did, Russians still controlled those areas, and therefore they kind of claimed all those people that lived there. But yeah, it seems like it's complicated because you have kind of like, I guess the further east you get, the more kind of like Asian looking people get, and whether would Russians consider those type of Asian looking Russians to be traditional Russians?
Well, this is where things get complicated. As like is no surprise to anyone, Russians are pretty xenophobic, racist, homophobic. Uh, so those people are like, they're all criminals, they're all bandits, like they're fucking everything up. But the moment one has success or makes them proud Of course he's Russian. He's one of ours. He's one of our like pride and joy.
Double standard.
Like, you know, like Jewish or Armenian chess players, because Russia's all about chess. Like, oh yeah, he's Russian. He's a Russian. And I saw this like shitty Russian war movie a couple of years ago. And, you know, there's some Mongols in the company. There's some Kazakhs in the company. Like, hey, where are you from? He's like, Kazakhstan. They're like, isn't that Russia? Or something stupid along those lines. He's like, I'm not Russian, I'm Kazakh. And they're like, since when are Kazakhs not Russian? Because he's a good boy and he did them proud. And so they're claiming him as one of theirs. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something similar with Colombia and Venezuela where, the crisis in Venezuela. So the tons of Venezuelans trickled down into Colombia and they're like flooding the social healthcare systems. And so they've been completely like othered. I was pretty much unaware of this when I was there. But it's interesting there is that they look almost identical to Colombians. There's no kind of like physical difference. But right. I think that, the same type of stereotypes of like the thieves and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure some of them are because they are destitute. They're literal refugees. But I think that as soon as someone looks a little bit different, that's the easy thing to hang upon them, to be like that. When you're tired on an airplane, then your brain starts getting automatically more racist, I think. That's good. And I'd like to think an educated, self-aware person is like, oh no, that's me being lazy, differentiating someone else who isn't really part of the problem, but I'm scapegoating them. Whereas the dumb person says it and starts believing in it. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's it.
All right. Well, I think we did it. I want to read that book because that the broader picture, just how the story about the none of the TV crime shows appeared real, and the guys were like, well, let's hire some real thugs and like some Wrexham shit and film it, and it was a hit. All that stuff sounds fucking fascinating.
What's fucked about that book? It is one of those things where the things are too ridiculous that they can't be fiction. But for someone who's lived it, it's frustrating to no end. You know what it's like? A couple years ago, I used to love watching Richard Dawkins debates as well as Christopher Hitchens debates. But at a certain point, it made me super depressed and like empty because not that it's a waste of time, but no one's going to change their mind just because they're like super articulate in proving my beliefs right. This religious dickhead he's talking to isn't going to change his mind. It's a waste of time. And so reading these books that expose just how bad Russia is, it's like, but fuck, I lived that. And it's not like Russia's going to be like, oh shit, this is embarrassing. Let's get better. So for me, that book put me in like a really deep depression, but it's amazingly like entertaining and well written.
Yeah, I know what you mean about wallowing in something you're already, like I think there's a Terrence McKenna quote where he's like, when you get the message from God, put down the phone. Like, don't try and speak again. You're just a fool's errand. You're wasting time. But, all right, man. We'll, let's call it. And then, we'll talk about some more bullshit next week.
All right.